together again, my friends. My name is Senator James Sanders Jr., and this podcast is called Can We Be Clear? Let's be clear, my friends. In this day and age of fuzzy thinking, where everybody's all over the place, where you just can't get a straight answer to a straight question, on this podcast, we get deep and we go and we get straight answers. And if ever there was a subject that needed straight answers, the subject is El Haj Malik El Shabazz. Yes, indeed. This is May 19th, and this is Malcolm X, or the man we know as Malcolm X, his 96th birthday. My. It flows, and it seems like just yesterday, where we were talking about the 50th and all the rest of these days. Well, be that as it may, I brought together two of the best folk that money cannot buy to speak on this subject. And man, I tell you, this is a subject where we are trying to find out what happened. What happened? There's so many parts of Malcolm X that we could delve into, but we're only going to take one part of this. And that is the most titillating part, I guess, for some. Who killed Malcolm X and what led up to it, who was part of it, etc. And we're going to look at it through the prism of the latest allegation, where a gentleman stepped forward and said that he was a cousin of someone who gave a deathbed confession saying that he played an incredible role in that. And that we're going to hear our doctor, Dr. Muhammad, who's going to explain what happened with this deathbed, the allegation and his take on it. Then we're going to go to Tyrone Powers, and he will give his take on it. And along the way, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents because I just don't know how not to, but well, one step at a time. Now, if you're ready for this, I want you to get ready for all of this. Brother Muhammad, good to see you back. Take 30 seconds to explain who you are, and the same when it's your time, Brother Powers, and then go straight into this deathbed confession, sir.
Well, thank you for having me back, Senator Sanders. It's quite a pleasure. I am, of course, Abdur-Rahman Muhammad. I'm an independent historian, journalist, and writer here in the Washington, D.C. area. Emmy nominated for the 6-part docuseries currently on Netflix. It's been on Netflix the last year and a half or so, entitled "Who Killed Malcolm X?" I guess today we're going to talk about the Ray Wood letter, the deathbed confession. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I've done video presentations on it, and also was featured in a major story, over 4,000 words, in the Washington Post recently on it. And I'd sure like to clarify some things and really give my informed opinion about it.
Well, I look forward to it. Why don't you make your allegation, your not the allegation, let's get rid of that, your position clear now, and then we'll go to Brother Powers.
Well, let's talk about what the claim is. The claim is that we have a New York City undercover police officer named Raymond Wood, who it is claimed gave a deathbed confession that he wrote in a letter and entrusted to his cousin, a man named Reggie Wood, out of Tampa, Florida, that he believed that he was involved in weakening the security detail of Malcolm X at the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965, that he played a role in ensnaring two of Malcolm's followers in a plot to blow up the Statue of Liberty. And that by ensnaring them in this plot, he, effectively weakened the security detail at the door at the Audubon Ballroom about a little less than a week later. This claim was made last February 20th, the day before Malcolm, the 96th commemoration or remembrance of Malcolm's assassination at the Shabazz Center, which was formerly the Audubon Ballroom, in the presence of Malcolm's daughters and co-signed by attorney Benjamin Crump. We at first didn't know what to make of this allegation or this claim, so to speak. And so we tried to give it the benefit of the doubt, but on further analysis of it and digging down into the historical facts as they existed at that time, I came to the conclusion, and a number of other experts, Dr. David Garrow, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, and others, Peter Goldman, who wrote the first full-length biography of Malcolm X, post the autobiography. He also comes down that the letter is a fraud, that it's a hoax, manufactured by Reggie Wood for the purpose of, number one, he wanted to make some money from a book that he was selling. And number two, what I have heard and what's been shared to me by the Woods family is that he wanted to have a Who Killed Malcolm X 2. And he wanted to play a starring role in the next, the next episode of that series. So that's my take on it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a fake, and that's my opinion. And we can go into reasons for that throughout the course of the talk.
Well, yeah, I see you're pulling punches today.
No, I don't pull punches. You can see that from Who Killed Malcolm X. If you watched it, you see I don't pull punches.
No, you certainly do not, sir. I was having some fun here, but Dr. Powers, yes. Good to see you again.
Great to be here.
Who are you, and do you have a position on this one?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you have this format because communication, information is so extremely important. And Dr. Muhammad, I did watch the documentary, and it's well done, excellent, well documented, and well organized and structured so that people could follow it, whether you had a PhD or no degree at all. Anyone who watched what you put together could walk through that story. You walk them physically and visually through that time to come to some very logical conclusions. So I want to thank you for that, first and foremost.
Thank you.
Here's what I haven't done the research that Dr. Muhammad done on the letter and so on. I've read the stories on it in the different outlets, obviously. But here's what I do know for a fact, having been a special agent with the FBI, working intelligence, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, civil rights violations, and also having been a police officer. I do know from a fact, from firsthand knowledge, that the FBI absolutely unequivocally wanted Malcolm dead. They absolutely unequivocally fully infiltrated Malcolm's group and also the Nation of Islam. I've sat down and watched and read the actual files, even though I wasn't supposed to. It was for eyes only, but I was in the building. I was a special agent. I could go anywhere I want to, and I actually read some of the files. They absolutely wanted him. So they weakened, no doubt about it, put things in motion to create even more division between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. We know what the issues were from a historical standpoint, but they were so intimately involved in instigating that, and they prided themselves. And the FBI, in fact, you were given what they call an incentive award if you wrote to the director and says, this is what I've been able to conjure up. These are the two people I've been able to put against each other. This is the dissension I've been able, and not only in the Nation of Islam, but in all the other organizations. So the pathway to assassination, the pathway to his death, no doubt has intimate hands-on work from the FBI. So the fact that the security may have been weakened, even though, as Mr. Muhammad, like I said, he's done the research, is seems absolutely logical to me, not necessarily via the way the gentleman is who's trying to write the letter and write the book and got the fact that the FBI was intimately involved in that, the kind of surveillance. I know we've read about it in history, but when I sat down and read the files, the kind of surveillance that they put on people like Malcolm X and even Dr. King and others, none of us would be able to deal with that kind of scrutiny 24 hours a day, from everything you did, from the time you wake up to the time you went to bed, even when who you saw, who you talked to, when you went to the restroom, the kind of detailed notes they captured was designed for two things. One, to cause psychological pressure on all these particular leaders. But secondly, if they decided, or if they got the green light from the president or those who can give the green light to eliminate people with extreme prejudice, they would have so much information that they could choose the date, time, and the way in which these things took place. And they were very strategic in the philosophy that anything they did, the Bureau said, and even when I was with the FBI, it still said that whatever you do, no matter how successful it is, be sure to protect the brand of the FBI. And so things were strategically done so they couldn't be brought back to the FBI. Accusations could be made, but there was always, you were required, not requested, you were required to make sure in your strategy to put these things in place that you gave them enough room where it could never, they gave them enough plausible deniability so it couldn't come back on the Bureau. And that situation hasn't changed, to be quite frank with you.
Well, that's an interesting point. Always fascinating points that both of you raise. Let me, in this saintly assembly, the devil needs an advocate, and let me be he for a moment. Let me be him, if you wish. One of the Ray Wood's allegations, the crux of his whole allegation is that an undercover cop, a Black undercover cop, was tasked with getting Malcolm's two of his better security out of the running, out of the game for this period. Now, as a former Marine, there's no such thing as a former Marine, but as a Marine, sir, that is plausible, sir. If you're going, you deal with redundancy. One of the main charges against that was, why would they do that? Because they had so many things. But intelligence or the military dealt with redundancy. You had a bunch of things. They just didn't have one strategy or one way of going. When they had informers, they would have several informers because they wanted to test each one against one another, make sure nobody's secretly saying this or whatever. So they believed in redundancy. So the idea that the FBI could entrap Malcolm's people or some of his chief people to be away, to be off the scene at that moment, has some possibilities, sir, because it deals with redundancy. And if you're going to allow this type of heinous assassination to take place, you do not want his best people around. You want them out of the picture and out of the game. In fact, you just want it so weak, the weakest folk out, because you would get the biggest splash. Now, Brother Powers, how wrong, how off am I on this thinking?
Well, let me just say this to you. If they are your best security people, they're not leaving your side. So you can't, there's a contradiction with saying they're my best security people, but they decided to weaken to go at a time when they know my life is being threatened by a number of entities, based on what's being said and what he had experienced in France when he was kept off the plane, what he was dealing with the FBI, what his family was dealing with, what he was dealing with the Nation of Islam. To say your best security people would then find something more important than securing you takes away the notion of a best security people. Because if I am your right-hand man, and this is, I know from my work in the FBI, and I am your top security person, for example, presidents find a liking with their Secret Service agents. They find the one that they believe is best qualified to protect them. In fact, Donald Trump got rid of agents that he feared were not in physical shape to protect them. And once you find those best people don't leave your side to go on another mission, to go to dinner, to go on a date, or otherwise they're not your best people. So
I've done you a great disservice, Brother Powers. His best people were arrested and were in jail at the time. They were arrested and ensnared in this phony plot to bomb the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
So it's not that they left, it's that they were taken away from the scene. And that is the crux of what Ray Woods is claiming.
So your best people, again, I want to go back to this from my background. Your best people, first of all, if they were involved in such a plot, will let you know, because they are your best people.
Sure.
They are your trusted allies. You are their trusted allies. And why would you if this is something that they're involved in, and this is something that they have been arrested and taken away for, then you know for a fact that you've got to replace them immediately. And there's some other questions, there's some other conversations. We should have been reading this all along, that Malcolm's best people, according to Betty Shabazz and according to others, were arrested or weren't there, or so on and so forth. So that's my only, like I said, I hadn't done the work that Dr. Muhammad had done. He's done extraordinary work on that. But I'm telling you from my experience and my expertise, if I have best people and they're involved in something else, the reason they are my best people is because I know that, and they know me, and they know my setup. They know everything about me. So even if they were arrested, if they were taken away because they were involved in this plot, it would have meant that Malcolm somehow knew that they were involved in this particular plot. And it doesn't seem to me, and this is where I'm speculating, a plot that Malcolm would be interested in and blowing up the Statue of Liberty. Malcolm was interested in retaliating when Muslims were killed. He was interested in the self-defense of Black people, specific incidents when the Muslim brother was killed out in California, and specific incidents. He wasn't as interested in symbolic violence, but self-defense. That was his statement all along, not symbolic violence. He wasn't. And to me, if they took on this particular plot, and they very well, I'm not saying they could not have without letting him know, and we keep saying they were his best people, his top guys, it's something they would have discussed with him, and it's probably something that he would have vetoed. But again, the person who have done the most research on this is Dr. Muhammad.
Well, Dr. Muhammad, the floor is yours. You've heard I claim that it was possible, and what do you say to that, sir?
Well, what I say is that, if all of this took place, okay, it would only confirm what we had already established in our series, Who Killed Malcolm X, okay? That the federal government, through their counterintelligence program, was involved in an array of dirty tricks and incitement to murder, pitting the sides against one another, planting false news articles in the newspapers, claiming that Malcolm was trying to be the number 2 man, the number 1 man, and this kind of thing. So, if this letter were true, okay, I would be, or I should be, the first one to champion it, because it would only verify, right, or confirm what we already established. But before we, accept something into the historical record, all right, we have to scrutinize it. You know what I'm saying? Now, when I first heard these charges, or these claims rather, I had to give it the benefit of the doubt because, that's just my personality and my philosophy, to always give people the benefit of the doubt because these were extraordinary claims. Here you had a gentleman who was claiming that his own kinfolk, all right, was implicated some way in the murder of Malcolm X. Okay. Now, if that were a lie, okay, that is a horrendous lie. It's a horrific lie. Okay. To write someone in your family into one of the most, infamous crimes in U.S. history, one of the most, abominable acts of treason against Black people in America, to to implicate your own family in that would be, a monstrous lie. So I gave it a benefit of the doubt, and I said, okay, let's take a look at it. All right. Also, I am not at the time, I wasn't. I'm an expert on the assassination of Malcolm X. I'm not necessarily an expert on the Statue of Liberty bombing. Because before this letter emerged, the Statue of Liberty bombing and Ray Wood stood off here, in another lane. So that wasn't my lane. So I had to, go back to the documents. I went back to Ray Wood's testimony that he gave before the House Un-American Committee, pardon me, in the late 60s. And I went back to what we already knew about the assassination. And then the thing was, it wasn't making sense. In the first place, and let me just deal with why it doesn't make sense and why it's false, because that's important to understand. In the first place, these two gentlemen who were supposed to be, Malcolm's security detail, his best men, as you say, okay? They were not his best men. In fact, Walter Bowe, who was one of the founders of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, him and his wife, Nan Bowe, they were right there in the beginning. But very early on, he left Malcolm's organization. And he left Malcolm's organization because Malcolm would not involve himself in something like the Statue of Liberty bombing, okay? Malcolm, although he was quite militant, he believed in armed self-defense. He rooted that in the Second Amendment. Okay, so he wasn't trying to overthrow the Constitution. He said this is our Second Amendment rights as American citizens to defend ourselves. That's a natural right. Okay, but wanted violence and terrorism, he would have never signed on to. Walter Bowe, totally different story. Okay. Walter Bowe believed that Malcolm wasn't radical enough, that Malcolm wasn't prepared to, quote, do anything, all right? Meaning some type of bombing or what happened later when we had police officers murdered, by Black Panthers and this and that. Malcolm would have never signed on to that. Absolutely not, okay? He rooted everything that he taught within, the context of the American Constitution. So that's number one. Walter Bowe was very dissatisfied with Malcolm. And from my investigation, because Walter Bowe is still alive, he's like 90 years old. He lives in Brooklyn, and I'm told he's still just as radical as he was in the 1960s. Okay, they say he hasn't changed. He's just 90 years old. So that's the first thing. Walter Bowe wasn't in Malcolm's organization at the time of the assassination. He had long gone. He was doing his own thing. We have an interview with him in 1997 where he says that he had left the organization. And by the way, we know as historians, we know who was Malcolm's top security guys, okay? Reuben Francis, who shot Talmage Hayer in the leg, okay, was his top security guy. James 67 X Shabazz, who went on to become known as Abdullah Abdul Razak. Okay. Luqman Abdur-Rahim, or also known as Anas Luqman. Okay, we know who Malcolm's top security people were. So then out the blue, we're hearing about, Walter Bowe and this young man named, Khalil Sayed. Now, Khalil Sayed was a very young man. He was only about 22 years old. Okay, he was an engineering student. I believe he was a graduate of Howard University in engineering. All right, but he was only 22 years old. It is my understanding from my research and my interviewing, contemporaries from that era, that he was assigned to protect Malcolm's home in the aftermath of the house bombing on February 15th, that morning. That was Khalil, because Malcolm still had, family artifacts in there and what have you. And, later on, because, he was evicted, later on, he would come up, he would come back to the house and clear out the home. But until that happened, it was Khalil Sayed's job to protect Malcolm's house. He was not on Malcolm's door security. So that's number one. Number one is they weren't major security personnel, as is claimed. That's number one. Number two, in the case of Bowe, he was not even in Malcolm's organization, okay? So the letter said that Ray Wood's handlers watched and studied these two men and saw how intricate they were to the security. So therefore they would ensnare these two because they were so critical, to the security operation. When in fact, Walter Bowe was not even in the organization. That's number one. Number two, Khalil Sayed was a very young man who was entrusted to protect Malcolm's home, and that's it. That's number one. Number two, if anyone weakened the security at the door on February 21st, 1965, it was Malcolm X himself. And that's a very well-known fact.
Yes.
Okay. In fact, over the decades, Malcolm's colleagues and followers were criticized quite harshly for obeying Malcolm when he ordered them to lighten the security at the door. Why? Because Malcolm was trying to get another kind of crowd, okay? He was trying to change that militaristic Nation of Islam type culture at the door, greeting the people coming in, because he feared that it was frightening off the Black middle class and the Black professional classes that he was trying to attract to his movement, okay? So we have it on the testimony of Talmage, the convicted assassin, the true convicted assassin, who gave an interview to Peter Goldman in the late 70s, where he said that they were the assassins, the 5-man team, over the winter of 64 and 65. They were testing Malcolm's security. They were testing the security at the door. And when they were allowed to just walk right in, that's what gave them the confidence to know that they could carry this assassination out, because no one was checking at the door. And they weren't checking because Malcolm ordered that. And that has to do like when he went to Africa, he was pilloried by the African leaders to say, okay, we just saw the March on Washington. We see Dr. King standing on the stage, right? With, Marlon Brando and James Baldwin and all of these people, okay? All of these great luminaries in American history and culture. Okay, Malcolm, who's with you? Who are the big Negroes that we see? Harry Belafonte, we see all these people, Sidney Poitier, we see all these people with Dr. King. Who's with you? Okay, what is your program? And what are you trying to accomplish? For Dr. King, it was clear, right? Integration through nonviolent passive resistance, okay? Nonviolence. It was very clear what Dr. King was about. What are you about, Malcolm? And he didn't have, cogent answers to those questions. And he felt a little embarrassed that he didn't have professional classes, people in the arts and entertainment like Dr. King, and he felt that he was frightening those people off with that Nation of Islam searching and patting people down. Let me look in your bag and all of that. Okay. So he said, hey, look, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're scaring the people away. Okay. Also, he was, being influenced and in the circles of the Black literati of New York, Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee, Juanita Portier, and people like this, John Oliver Killens. All right. And, those people, they don't like those kind of people, they don't like all this, being patted down and being treated like criminals at the door and what have you. And he was sensitive about that. So if anyone lacking the security at the door, it was Malcolm X himself. And so that's just, some of the reasons why we say that, this letter is fraudulent. And not only that, but my dear brother, as an FBI agent, and by the way, thank you for your service, because there's many of our people who believe that just by virtue of the fact that you're an FBI agent or in the service of the FBI, that you're the enemy of Black people, that you're a traitor to the race and what have you. Many of the people in the Malcolm X circles, this is how they talk. And I say, to them, we have to decide what we want to be. You know what I mean? Do we want to become, James Saunders, Senator Saunders, who was influenced by Malcolm? You know what I'm saying? Do we want to be like Dr. Powers, who was influenced by Malcolm? Is this not our country too? We have to decide what we want. You can't on the one hand say, you want freedom, justice, and equality, and then at the same time, when we're able to attain these positions of power and influence, to call our people sellouts and traitors to the race. So one more point. Let me just make this point here.
No problem. Go
Let
ahead.
me make this point. In those days, in the 60s, you wouldn't have had to manufacture, right, this elaborate plot to just snatch two brothers off the street. Okay? The police could just go and snatch two brother. They do it now. 1964, 65, you think they would have to manufacture this elaborate plot and get it all in the news? They would just, hey, come over here, get in the car and hold them for a week. You don't even need the plot. It's too fantastical, and it just doesn't ring true. And finally, let me just say this while I'm on a roll. Look, Ray Wood, was a decorated police detective who went on to become a sergeant. He never even came in as an officer. He came in the department as a detective. He came in from the Marine, I believe it's the Marine. Marine or the Navy?
I think it was the Navy.
Navy, right.
As a Marine, I take
well,
out.
I got you, brother. I'm violating now. I'm totally violating. I'm sorry. But yeah, so he came in, right? He said in the letter from 1964 to 1961, I was an undercover officer, all right? Now, being in the military on police service, right? If you're a sergeant, if you're a detective, you're not gonna self-identify as an officer. This is the first thing where his daughter read the letter. She said, ho, my father would never identify himself as an officer. He never was an officer. He was a detective, and then he went on to be a sergeant. And that's a big deal to a white police officer, never mind a Black police officer in 1965, 64, 65. For a Black man to become a detective in the New York City Police Department in 1965 was a big deal, a huge deal. And so there's no way in the world he would have identified as, an officer. There was one more point that I wanted to make here. But yeah, that's really the main points that I want to make. If it comes back to me, I'll clarify.
Well, you made many points, Brother Powers. I suspect you have a point or two.
No, I don't. I think his analysis is a great analysis of all of that. And I just was going to comment when he mentioned when I went into the FBI, obviously there was some antagonism even for family members, especially because of COINTELPRO and the devastation it had wreaked on our community. In hindsight, I'm glad I did it at the encouragement of my mother, because I learned so much that I've been able to bring back to our community, to elected politicians, and consulting with them and developing some strategies for that. But what he laid out in terms of his analysis um, um, makes great sense. And I know for a fact that the only thing, and I guess he can educate, he's educating us on this, is that I agree that Malcolm was looking for or hearing the arguments about the people that Dr. King had in his circle, because Dr. King was able to touch all of these celebrities and so on and so forth. Many of those same people, they were in Malcolm's circle, but they weren't openly in his circle. They were
That's true.
covertly believing in what he was saying. It made logical sense, a great deal of what he was saying.
Absolutely.
They hesitated because of the Christian Muslim thing and the Nation of Islam thing in and of itself. But overall, I think a lot of them were consistent with his message. I think that's why Malcolm thought it so important to recruit Muhammad Ali and to get credit for recruiting Muhammad Ali to the nation, or being in a relationship with Muhammad Ali from that standpoint. So I think his message resonated with a great deal of people, but the strategy of bringing these other people, as you indicated, the middle class, the upper middle class, and the few we had that could be considered in the wealth class at that particular time, to bring them on board with him and to have them openly support him, which is the transition I think that he was making. There was a lot that he did in the Nation of Islam in terms of their discipline, in terms of their security, in terms of their making sure that they were prepared to defend themselves, that I think a whole lot of people, even the deacons for defense, which were the Christians that martyred themselves kind of after the fruits of Islam, believed in. They just wouldn't openly come out and say it. And I don't know if Malcolm would have ever been able to build that kind of coalition, because I don't think he would have ever diluted his message to the point that would have allowed for that. He would have always believed in self-defense,
Right.
and that self-defense was common sense. And he would have always believed in not turning the other cheek, because he wasn't going to take punishment from what he considered these diabolical enemies, whether they were the Ku Klux Klan or others who were harming people, Black people. He was devastated when people, even when he was in the nation, was hurt. And these are not only from the readings, but these were also in the documents of the FBI, that his philosophy, he is one of the documents said he is an absolute believer in self-defense. So I don't know if the things that brought people into Dr. King's circle, the nonviolence, turn the other cheek, he would ever been able to get that audience. But I do completely understand what you're saying about what he was trying to do from that standpoint. I do believe that he was, and doing that, I do believe one of them, if I could, the reducing of security probably was a bad move, because the reality of the matter is King needed more security, as we can see, because security would not have let him stand on the balcony of a motel without people around him, maybe inside of a hotel with security. So I do think that the security piece was necessary, even if people are put off by it. It certainly was necessary based on the number of Black leaders like Medgar Evers and others who had been assassinated without security. But I do completely understand what you're saying.
Okay, let me just make this one point to kind of dovetail on what you said. There were a lot of prominent personalities who liked what Malcolm was saying, but like you said, were not able to publicly embrace him like that.
Right.
That is true. But it is also true, that the Black middle class and the Black professional classes, they really had, many of them had contempt for Malcolm. It's not really well known that people like Thurgood Marshall, all right, had utter contempt for Malcolm. He called him like an articulate thug. All right. You had Carl T. Rowan, who was writing articles, and in fact, you read the epilogue of the autobiography of Malcolm X, okay, in the aftermath of his assassination, Carl T. Rowan, who was, the preeminent Black journalist at that time, he said, well, what's the big deal? He was a hater, he was a demagogue, essentially like good riddance. Howard University would not allow Malcolm to speak to the NAACP student chapter on the campus. This was in the early 60s, unless, it was a debate, and it had to be a debate, and it was a debate between him and Bayard Rustin. So, you are absolutely correct. As long as Malcolm kept self-defense on the table, all right, the civil rights movement was never going to be able to embrace him. They were going to have to keep him at a distance. And if for no other reason, a guy like Malcolm, who had made statements that were said to be anti-Semitic, they pull that canard out, okay? That would have messed up the funding sources for the civil rights movement. So for a lot of reasons, they would not have been able to embrace him. But I just like to come back to this point that I was making. I'm just appealing to reason here. When a letter like this presents itself, all right, that's so explosive,
right,
and the man is standing on a stage with Benjamin Crump, all right, and the Shabazz daughters, all right, you have to be respectful, and you have to, like I said, give it the benefit of the doubt. However, you also have to be skeptical of the medium by which you're receiving this letter. Okay, this is not a videotape, which is a whole different thing in the historical profession. All right, this is not an audio tape. All right, Ray Wood was, again, this is the point I was trying to emphasize, talking about his credentials and his rank in police service. He knew from the long career that he had the necessary elements of a strong exoneration. Okay, he would have wanted that letter to be notified. He would have wanted that letter to be witnessed. Okay, he wouldn't even have submitted a letter, quite frankly. He would have just went to his iPhone 11, because he just died this October, it said, October, November. He would have went to his iPhone 11 and read the letter, gave an apology, so on and so forth, okay? Who writes letters in 2021? We got the Postal Service going out of business now because no one's sending letters. The only one sending packages is Amazon and UPS, right? So who's sending letters? So now when you have a letter being brought by this individual, Reggie Wood, now we got to look at Reggie Wood. And you go on Google, all you had to do is do a Google search of him. The man has a long record of committing scams in the state of Florida through his construction business. He has Evergreen Lawn Solutions. Just put in Evergreen Lawn Solutions, Reggie Wood in Google, and see what comes up. And you'll see that this should have never even got to Benjamin Crump, okay? It should have never even got to the Shabazz daughters. To me, it's a scandal, and it's a fraud, and it cannot be made part of the historical record, and I will stand on that.
Well, the one thing I can add to that is this: the fact that you did the research, because here's what I think the FBI thrived off and was often thrived off. And even to this day, I have to continue to talk about COINTELPRO 2021. Because of my recent employment with that agency, I'm not with them now, but what I know. But here's the fact that you, when this came up, you didn't automatically dismiss it. As a researcher, you went and did your homework. The fact that you're on this medium with the senator and you're walking people through it, I think is so important, because you've got to know that based on the history of these agencies and what they've done to so many of our leaders, people are inclined to believe them. And it's not because they are ignorant or anything like that. They need people like you and others, like the senator and others, like this format to say, okay, listen, we don't want to automatically dismiss that. As you indicated, I want to give them benefit of the doubt. And I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be emotional. Walk me through the way we're doing today, which is why this forum is so important, is because we have a lot of people out there, and I've addressed them as I've traveled the nation and outside the nation and say, Dr. Powers, can we make this plain? Can you put it down where the goats can get it? Can you walk us through it? Not walk your colleagues through it, not walk those and academe through it, not walk those who are avid readers through it. Can you walk us through it? And then can we have a conversation at this level rather than at this level where we're emotional and we're involved in the name calling? So the fact that you have walked people back through this, and I know it's important to you, I know the work you've done and so on and so forth, but for the people out there who are just lay people, who really wants to know this, who wants to know it without emotion, without the anger, but they just want to know it. As you have put it all together and as you walk through this, I think that's significant. I think it's significant for the senator to have us on today to discuss this in a logical way so that people watching can say, okay, now I get that. And I don't have to be angry. I don't have to be upset, but I have to be, and now I can see that in the future, when this kind of information come out, I will not dismiss it. I've got to give the people the benefit of the doubt rather than the government agencies that participated so aggressively in getting rid of Black leaders, as COINTELPRO detailed, getting rid of the next Black Messiah and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I need people to talk to me. You know, Elijah Muhammad in the nation used to always say, teach the people, don't beat the people. In other words, walk me through this. So I appreciate what you've done, and I appreciate the senator having this forum so you can do that.
The truth of the matter is I can count probably on 2 or 3 fingers the number of people in this country that could have broke it down the way that I just broke it down. The problem is that we're living in a culture right now, we're at a cultural moment where, you know, defund the police, abolish the police, right? There's a very anti-police mantra in certain quarters of the culture. We already know that the FBI was criminal in the way that it abused and murdered or was involved in, you know, the assassination of our leaders. So, you know, I mean, we already know that. Right. So it's very easy to become lazy about this issue. Folks wanted to believe that it was true. And that's what Reggie Wood knew. He knew that, and I'm just going to tell you what his own daughter, Ray Wood's daughter, told me, Kelly Wood. She told me that Reggie Wood, her cousin, told her that this is going to be the next Who Killed Malcolm X. This is going to be season 2. He said, and this is what happened. When he saw a tour guide, your humble brother, doing tours, he said, well, if that guy can do it, I certainly can do it, you know? So it gave him this idea, and he started trying to peddle this story to, you know, my team, you know, at, you know, Arc Media and whatever. He was trying to peddle the story. And when he couldn't get the kind of dollars that he was looking for, then he went to Benjamin Crump, okay, who, you know, who's a good guy. And, you know, I'm just sorry that Benjamin Crump didn't reach out to me first, quite, because I would have told him to run from this. You know, I would have told him, leave this alone. It don't smell right. All right. But, you know, it happened. And so perhaps we'll take this up in season 2, which we're about to gear up on, of Who Killed Malcolm X. And, you know, we'll analyze this. Reggie Wood is only going on, you know, like Nation of Islam type platforms. He won't go with people like David Garrow or myself or, you know, some of the scholars at John Jay College of Criminal Law who also said it's bogus, you know, for a whole lot of reasons, you know. And you know, so when you don't have videotape, when you don't have audio tape, and all you have is a man with a letter, okay, even if you look at the signature on the letter, look at the W in Ray Wood's name, look at the signet, look at the W on the letter, and look at the W on the envelope. Okay, and it's a wrap. We had, I happen to know that handwriting analysis was done on these signatures, and they concluded that yes, this is a fraud. This is a fraud. It's a manufacture, and so we have a responsibility, to come before the people, because, like I said, at this stage in the game, this so many years removed, we're at brother's 96th birthday. Okay, the number of people who have the expertise to break this down is very small. I mean, it's infinitesimal. And the Washington Post article, I'm the first scholar that went on the record, and I got a lot to put on the line. I have an Emmy nomination for this documentary. I'm the first person that went public and did a video with Ray Wood's daughter, in which I laid out this argument as I laid it out here. And that is what prompted the mainstream media to say, hey, we missed the story. We missed the story. We need to revisit this. Well, so I appreciate you.
Let me ask you a question, Doctor. Doctors, if I got Reggie on here, would you both come back and have some conversation with her?
I don't know. I don't want to legitimize that guy, honestly.
I see. Interesting.
I don't want to legitimize him.
I would. I think. Yeah, I would absolutely would. I think the conversation is worth having. Like, I think the documentary that Dr. Muhammad done was so well done. And I hear you, Doc. And the only part I would disagree with, I don't know if people are lazy and not wanting to do the research. There are people out there who watch your documentary who don't have the time to do the research, but trusted that was such a well done documentary that you allowed them to walk through this without them having, because there are people out there who truly believe in all of this history, who know about Malcolm, who know about his impact, who know about all of this, but they're working 2 and 3 jobs. And they need people like, they need people like you. Now, I know the other people who you're talking about, the people who automatically accepted it, who could have done the research. But in general, there's a whole group of people out there who are thankful for people like you, because they can't, by the nature of their lives, by the nature of their existence, by the nature of trying to take care of their children, they're interested, but they're not. The fact that they hear something like this, it's not that they're lazy and don't want to investigate it. It's just that they have to rely on people like you and others and the senator to help them walk through this. And they have to rely on people they have trust to walk through this. So with some, I understand what you're saying. It's laziness. For another group, it's, look, man, it's not lazy.
I'm talking about lay people.
No, I got what you're saying.
I'm not talking about the lay people.
Not talking about the lay people. I get it.
People who have tenured chairs at universities,
right? I understand
that just ran with this as if it was a fact,
No, I got you.
And then I started seeing stories on the morning shows trying to graft this letter onto who killed Malcolm X, like some kind of confirmation of who killed Malcolm X, and I said, oh, just no. And like I said, if it was true, for example, if this was a videotape of Ray Wood, or at least some audio of his voice, you know what I'm saying, then no one would be happier than me.
Right. And you said you gave it the
we've already established that the FBI was criminal in what it did, all right, in the assassination of Malcolm X and creating the climate of hate and vitriol against Malcolm. We've already established that. So if like I said, if a videotape had come forward, some cell phone footage, something like that, right? Now, if a letter came forward with some type of witness, whatever, now, okay, that's a little less strong. But here we've got a letter with no witnesses, right? No notary on it, nothing, just a common scammer from Florida who anyone could have Googled, and he's presenting this letter, and that's going to get grafted onto the 30, 40 years of research that's contained in Who Killed Malcolm X? No, I couldn't let that stand.
Right. And you did say in the beginning, when you began to speak, that you gave it the benefit of the doubt because of that history of antagonism between the agencies, and then you did the research. So I can, I can appreciate that. And I think people like to hear that. You didn't, when you started this conversation, you indicated you didn't dismiss it outright. You gave it the benefit of the doubt, and then you began your process, which is what you are, a historian and investigator, to come to the conclusion that you came to today, which I think too, we always have to do more of that if we're going to give something the benefit of the doubt. Even John F. Kennedy, and then later they always said trust but verify. So there's an there's an angle there that I'm not going to dismiss it, but at the same time, before I give this to the masses of people on this important issue for this important individual in the history of the country, in the history of the world, and certainly in the history of the Black community, I just want to make sure that it's straight. So I can appreciate that. I can honestly appreciate, and I appreciate your approach of doing the research, because what you've done today with the senator here is just walk out what you went through, what you evaluated, how you evaluated it, the other extra research that you did, not on the people who are mentioned and related and developed, and you gave other people, even if they wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt, you've given them something to go look at on their own, so they can come to their own conclusion. Those who are who have the leisure and the luxury of having the time to do that. And like I said before, your documentary is so great because I could tell my students who, when I'm teaching a course at one of the historically Black colleges, university, Bowie State University, I can tell them to tune into this. So it may pique their interest, and they may become researchers like you at some point.
Well,
based
maybe
on your
you'll invite
documentary.
me to Bowie. I'm right down the road.
Yes, sir. That would be great.
I would love
I'll
to come
work on
speak
that.
to your class.
I will-
Because one of the most bizarre, perhaps the most bizarre thing about this letter, okay, and Senator Sanders, my dear brother, I mean, just use our rational mind, okay? Ray Wood was exposed in the newspaper, in the New York Times, after this bomb plot was exposed and after the arrests were made. And he was lauded as a hero, okay? Like in the next day, in the newspaper, he was lauded as a hero, okay? Why would his handlers, now they've got the most important witness, right? And this Statue of Liberty plot was international. I've seen international footage about this case. The FBI is going to take their star witness, right, after his name has already been exposed in the media, and then a week later, they're going to send him to the Audubon ballroom after he's already been exposed in the public. Their star witness. To do what? The letter doesn't even say.
Well,
What did they send him back to do? It doesn't even tell you what he went back to do.
Well, let me tell you this, Dr. Muhammad. I am a researcher myself, and I am also a specialist in El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz.
I know you are.
And I started with just enough plausibility of this letter. Just I had my doubts, but I had just enough plausibility that there could be something real. But you have been totally convincing that your Washington Post article was the first part, but your statements here today have been totally convincing that that there's no there with this. That even if the letter were 100%, there's no smoking gun. Even if the letter, if every single thing was true, you are right. It only confirms a portion that we knew, and the amounts that we don't know are still out there.
And also the letter is also presented as a retrospective.
Yes.
Of Ray Wood, retrospectively looking back on the events and kind of constructing this conspiracy theory in his own mind.
Well, let me put a note on Ray Wood there. And I have heard some try to describe him as a hero. He absolutely was not. He was not a hero. These bomb plots, the Statue of Liberty bomb plot was proved to be a bogus and an entrapment. And the majority of the people who were involved in it, the cases were dismissed. One or two people got further in trouble because of the entrapment angle, that somebody showed them dynamite and they put it in their possession, etc. In this day and age, they would have as both of you pointed out, this day and age, they probably would have beat the entrapment part of it because they were just so clear that they were being set up. And Ray Wood was the chief person involved in setting them up. So this is not a hero. However, if any of this letter is true, he may be projecting himself. He may be projecting himself into the death of Malcolm X. You mentioned somewhere in the conversation, we mentioned how some people the Black middle class had a real did not like Malcolm X, and that is true. But remember the day we were looking at. Many of the Black middle class didn't even like Martin Luther King. They had trouble. In fact, the Black Baptist Church split over the issue of nonviolent or civil rights, actually. And then that Martin Luther King's wing became the progressive National Baptist. So my church did not support the civil rights movements. And it's a Black church. Well, it's a Black church. I'll say it that way. So there were a bunch of people who were not even clear on Martin Luther King, less Lord Malcolm X. They weren't, and I'm talking Black folk, and we're running around this day and age pretending that everybody was down with Martin Luther King. Come on now, the man died a lonely life, relatively speaking, abandoned by many of these so-called friends that he had, etc. Now, let's turn to Malcolm X for a second, and I'm giving you time to get your last points ready because we're going to close in a moment. Let's turn to Malcolm X for a moment, where now I agree with you. The gentleman who was involved in the Statue of Liberty fiasco, tragedy, was not the type that Malcolm would not support that type of stuff. Malcolm did, according to Dr. Bill Sales, Malcolm and others, Malcolm was open to the idea of what he and some others call a Black Mau Mau, and he was open to groups like the Revolutionary Action Movement under Max Sanford and things of that nature. So he did explore whether it was possible and they to have an uprising in this country. He was not simply he wasn't simply a philosopher theorizing the whole thing. Malcolm was more of a practitioner, but he did not, there's no evidence that he was leading any of these movements. Now, Brother Powers, you do need to write your book, your next book on COINTELPRO and other things. What you have learned since, I mean, that's around 5 books that what you have learned since your first book. And I had your first book when it first came out, man. I went through that Eyes to the Soul, was it? Oh man,
Eyes to My Soul.
Oh, I read it when it first came out. I think that ink wasn't even dry when I had my copy and was reading it.
Yes, sir. Well,
So
thank
I
you.
encourage you to write your second one, and you should put it in the chat here that you are a consultant and how people can get in touch with you. And I hope that as you conclude, you say what you consult in.
Yes,
And you put that in the chat. Now I'll let you go last so that you can type. If you type as slow as I,
yes.
you need all the time you can get. I hope you don't. Now, brother, wow, brother Muhammad, you're about to do a number 2 who killed my man.
Well,
Boy, that's man, I tell you, like I told you before, the Native American said, the teller of the truth must ride a fast pony. I really hope that you keep your pony handy, and I hope you keep telling the truth. I will let you give your concluding remarks, sir.
okay. Yeah, well, just a point of fact, whatever one thinks about Ray Wood, Khalil Sayed and Walter Bowe did about 21 months in prison for that. Now, of course, if that was post 9/11, they'd still be in prison. They would have died in prison. Okay. But when I saw this sentence, I couldn't believe it. What? 21 months for a plot ostensibly to blow up the Statue of Liberty? You know, so they did about 21 months. There was a young white girl from Canada who was involved in it. She's the one that turned state's evidence, and she was, allowed to go back to Canada and lived her life. Got in media, so that's how that story ended. What I would say, on Malcolm's 96th birthday, which is how we all began this, I think it's a wonderful thing that this brother has dominated the culture to such an extent over the course of the last, say, year and a half or so. We've had so many cultural productions like The Godfather of Harlem, of course, our series, Who Killed Malcolm X, which is international success. The Dead Are Rising, the new biography by Les Payne, which is excellent.
Yes.
Then we had One Night in Miami, okay, which talks about the night that Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay won the heavyweight championship of the world against Sonny Liston in that hotel room in Miami with Jim Brown and Sam Cooke and Malcolm. I mean, just a fantastic piece. And then also that just came out, Senator, I don't know if you know it or not, but the family of Malcolm X, the one in Michigan, Grand Rapids, and working with Malcolm's sister, Hilda, who just passed away in 2015.
Wow.
So about 92, 93 years old. She did a tell-all book with this white author from England, Jessica Russell, on the life of Louise Norton Little.
Wow.
Malcolm's mother. And I will tell you, the photographs alone are gold. Okay. And they identify for the first time, as I did in my autobiography course, who Malcolm's white grandfather is. Many people are going to be very surprised to find out about that guy. Very prominent on the island of Grenada. Buildings named after him and everything. Malcolm's grandfather, the rapist.
Yes. Please.
And so I just think it's just a wonderful thing that we've all been able to celebrate the life of this man, and he's been so impactful on all of us. I look at all of us here today as the children of Malcolm, and it's just such a great honor to have him bring us together, to lift him up. Once again, he's being quoted more now than Dr. King. Malcolm, especially in this moment of Black Lives Matter and the struggle that's going on right now, he has become a beacon of light and guidance. And happy birthday, dear brother, El Haj Malik El Shabazz. I hope to be here with the senator on your 100th birthday, inshallah.
If it's God's will. Brother Powers.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I think that the research that is done by Dr. Muhammad, and obviously, Senator, you are certainly an expert in the way you have these forums are significant, because the young people who I've had the opportunity to address across the nation and outside of the nation, whether it was in Bermuda or any other place that I've traveled to and had an opportunity to address them, they were interested in all of this history. In fact, even beyond Malcolm, they're interested in how Malcolm came. They're interested in the Nation of Islam because they don't believe that you can discuss Malcolm without discussing what brought Malcolm from Detroit Red and from the streets and what brought him to this philosophy. You got to do the whole thing, because the fact that the Nation of Islam was able to establish such an organization in the midst of everything else that was going on, in the midst of all that violence to them, is interesting in and of itself, because they believe, and I think that we all are doing this, that even as we study the history of Malcolm X, if we study the history of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, what can we do with that history to make it impact where we are today? They want to know, how do I connect the assassination of Malcolm X with lessons I should learn for today? In my security and consultant business, I talk about King being on a balcony of a motel rather than being in a room in a hotel with security. How does that impact us today in leadership? How do we dissect COINTELPRO? How do we dissect these assassins? How do we dissect the divisions that occurred between our organizations that weakened their ability to be effective, whether it was the Black Panther Party for self-defense? And that was their original name, not the Black Panther Party. Consistent with Malcolm, the Black Panther Party for self-defense, which is a clear indication, as I tell my young people, that Black people weren't aggressively going out and killing white people. We just wanted to leave us alone and let us increase our life chances. Almost the deacons for defense. Notice in these organizations, they all talk about, we don't want to hurt anybody, despite what's been done to us over 400 more years of slavery and lynching and Jim Crow. Our goal is to make things better. So the young people wanted to know how and I'm certainly going to reach out to you, get your information, and bring you the boy. They want to know how all of this history, Senator, and your position today, how that can help us today. Dramatically reduce crime in the inner city, enhance education. How do what we know about Malcolm on his 96th anniversary, how can they apply that? Not just only how they can know it, but how they can apply it to a practical use, so that we can change our current conditions. And I thank you so much, Senator, not only for being on this time, but for being on in the past. I thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for your expertise and your consistent work, your diligence in this. And I'm hoping we can continue these conversations and then put them in a way that young people can take them and execute them and activate them, so that we can get better, as well as with understanding history. And Senator, you said it so well. There were people who didn't like King. In fact, Thurgood Marshall didn't like King because Thurgood Marshall believed you should change the law, not be disobedient to the law. And he thought King's method. But in the end, Malcolm said this. He said, never confuse the methods with the objectives. As he matured and grew, he said, never confuse the methods with the objectives. We can have different methods. If our objective is the same, I'll meet you at the finish line. And I think that's what we can take from his life and legacy. And I think that's one of the things that I've been able to pull out and give the students. Don't be upset them because they're a Christian organization or they're a Muslim organization. If their objective is to develop us, to get us to reduce crime, to make our families better, our communities better, to make us entrepreneurs, to get us our first own Black hospital, since we're the sickest people in the world, how do we bring those different methods together to meet that common objective? And I think that's where Malcolm was headed. And I thank you, Senator, for continuing this dialogue and moving us in that direction.
Well, I think both of you, I always learn from both of you. Out of Africa, always something new. I always learn from you guys, and we will do this again and again and again until we get it right. On the issue of security, Malcolm's security, nobody less than the prison leader George Jackson critiqued Malcolm X and his people and said, for a person who understood the system so much, He did not.
Right.
He did. George Jackson's criticism is perhaps the best progressive radical criticism
right.
of Malcolm X by a follower of Malcolm X. But George Jackson's life and his ending is one that really speaks to COINTELPRO and things of that nature, but one step at a time. My friends, this program was called Let's Be Clear, and two of the clearest thinkers that you can get, that money cannot buy, have just spoken to you today and have laid down all kinds of wisdom. They told you where to do the research, where don't, in fact, if I can speak for both of them, don't believe what they said. Go take the information that they gave you, read it for yourself, and if you come to the same conclusion, then you can go. I start everything with a certain amount of necessary skepticism, healthy skepticism, not pessimism, not any of that stuff, but just enough salt so I could see everything. And if it leads me to the truth, and then I use my gift of discernment, well, there we go thinking again. So under those conditions, this has been the show called Let's Be Clear, and there's no better way. People have said that Malcolm is gone and that's over. You have heard from others that Malcolm, there's a resurgence going on. And I'm going to conclude with what Malcolm would want you to think. And this is to those detractors of Malcolm. And Malcolm's one of his last words that I'm going to leave with you was he said, every shut-eye ain't sleep and every goodbye ain't gone. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Let's do this again.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right.